Freeze! Hands on your head! Now! On the wide, clean slate sidewalk, shaded by an ancient oak tree, a black man was in a push-up position. He appeared to be in his late 50s, with an incredibly fit build, sweat dotting his forehead and soaking his simple gray t-shirt and old black athletic shorts. He had just finished his exercise set and was preparing to stand up to continue his usual morning run. But his plans were halted by Officer Ryan Vance, a white policeman around 35 years old, who had just stepped out of a patrol car parked nearby. Vance approached, his right hand hovering over the Glock pistol holstered at his hip, his eyes narrowed with suspicion and annoyance as he looked at the black man exercising in his clean patrol area. "Did you hear me? Get up! Hands on your head!" Vance repeated, his voice harsher, his hand now gripping the butt of his gun. The black man slowly stood up straight, showing no signs of panic, only a hint of surprise and confusion in his eyes. He turned to face the officer, his hands remaining naturally at his sides. "Is there a problem, officer? Did I do something wrong?" His voice was deep and steady, betraying no fear. This very calmness seemed to further provoke Vance. He wasn't used to black people, especially in this neighborhood, appearing unfazed when confronted by police. "What you're doing here is the problem," Vance snapped, taking another step closer, invading the man's personal space. "This neighborhood isn't the place for your kind to be loitering. What are you planning to steal?" The blatant, derogatory, and racist remark made the man frown. "I'm exercising, officer. I live here." "Live here?" Vance scoffed, a contemptuous smirk spreading across his face. He glanced at the man's simple, worn, athletic clothes. "Looking like that? You think I believe you? Where's your ID? Show it to me." "I'm out for exercise. I don't carry my wallet," the man replied, his voice still calm but now tinged with coldness. "And I have no obligation to show identification when I haven't violated any laws. Please tell me the legitimate reason you stopped me and ordered me to put my hands on my head." The articulate response and the demand for a legitimate reason were like fuel to the fire. Vance felt his authority challenged, being lectured by someone he looked down upon. Anger and ingrained prejudice flared, clouding any rational judgment. "The reason is I don't like your face. The reason is I suspect you," Vance yelled, his face flushing red. And then, in a dangerously unnecessary escalation, he drew his service pistol from its holster. Click! The harsh metallic sound echoed in the quiet morning air. Vance pointed the dark muzzle directly at the unarmed black man standing before him. "On the ground! Get down, now, or I'll shoot!" The man froze for a split second, not out of fear, but out of astonishment at the officer's reckless and idiotic action. He looked straight down the barrel, then up into the eyes burning with anger and perhaps a hidden trace of fear belonging to Vance. The atmosphere on Oakmont Drive suddenly thickened, becoming suffocatingly tense. A dangerous line had just been crossed. Staring down the black barrel pointed directly at him, Colonel James Iron Mike Mitchell of the United States Marine Corps felt no panic. Years spent on the world's most brutal battlefields, facing real mortal danger, had forged in him nerves of steel and an extraordinary ability to remain calm in life-or-death situations. Now, standing on the familiar sidewalk of the neighborhood he had recently moved into after receiving a new assignment at a nearby base, facing a local police officer who was losing control, he felt only profound disappointment and a simmering anger. He looked directly into Officer Ryan Vance's eyes. He saw anger, concealed fear, and most clearly, ignorance fueled by racial prejudice. This officer had clearly been misled and agitated by his appearance. A black man in simple workout clothes exercising in an affluent white neighborhood. Drawing his weapon was an extremely dangerous and utterly unjustified escalation. "Officer," Colonel Mitchell said, his voice still deep and steady without a tremor, yet carrying surprising weight and control. "I strongly advise you to lower your weapon immediately. You are making a grave mistake." "Shut up!" Vance yelled, the gun in his hand trembling slightly. He hadn't expected the subject to show no fear, even daring to advise him. "I told you to get on the ground. Are you deaf?" Colonel Mitchell didn't move. He knew complying with the irrational command of someone losing control could be even more dangerous. He needed to de-escalate the situation while clearly establishing his identity and status. "I will not be getting on the ground, officer," he stated clearly, "because I have done nothing wrong. You are the one violating the law by pointing a firearm at an unarmed citizen without just cause." He slowly brought one hand to the chest of his t-shirt, where a military ID card was discreetly clipped inside the thin windbreaker he had taken off before exercising. "Now, I am going to show you my identification, but first, you need to lower your weapon." Vance hesitated. The man's calmness and complete lack of fear started to make him feel uneasy. He was used to subjects, especially people of color, acting scared or subservient when facing police, particularly at gunpoint. But this man was different. There was something in his eyes, in his voice, that radiated latent authority. "What trick are you trying to pull?" Vance asked, his voice still trying to sound tough but wavering slightly. "I'm not pulling any tricks," Colonel Mitchell replied. "I just want you to know who you're dealing with. Lower the weapon, officer. That is a reasonable and safe order for both of us." He intentionally used the word order, a professional habit, but it had an unexpected effect. Vance glanced around. The street was still relatively empty, but he noticed the curtain twitch in the window of a nearby mansion. Someone was watching. The pressure began to mount. If he shot, or if something happened, there would be witnesses. And this man was too calm, too confident. What if he really was somebody? After a few tense seconds, Vance slowly lowered the barrel of his gun, though he kept a ready stance, his finger still near the trigger. "All right, let me see the ID. Hurry up. Don't try anything stupid." Colonel Mitchell moved deliberately slowly, using 2 fingers to carefully retrieve the military ID card from inside his shirt. It was a standard Department of Defense ID featuring his photo in a Marine Corps uniform, the rank of colonel, and the name James T. Mitchell. He held the card out towards Vance. "This is my identification, officer." Vance squinted at the card. At first, he just glanced at it, but then he froze as he saw the word Colonel and the emblem of the United States Marine Corps. He snapped his head up to look at the man before him, then back down at the card, unable to believe his eyes. "Colonel," Vance stammered, his voice suddenly losing all its arrogance. "Marine Corps?" "That's correct, officer," Colonel Mitchell confirmed, his voice even. "Colonel James T. Mitchell, currently assigned to the Joint Task Force Regional Command." He clearly stated his current position, one of significant influence and authority. Vance's face began to turn from red to deathly pale. He knew he had just made a terrible mistake. Pointing a gun at a Marine colonel? Such a high-ranking officer? What would the consequences be? I didn't know," Vance stammered, the gun in his hand now feeling impossibly heavy. He quickly lowered it completely, holstering it back on his hip. "Sir, Colonel, sir, I apologize. It was just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Colonel Mitchell raised an eyebrow, his sharp gaze fixed on Vance. "You call pointing a gun at someone exercising, insulting them with racist language, and threatening to shoot them a misunderstanding, Officer Vance?" He had managed to read the name tag on the officer's chest. "No, that's not it." Vance waved his hands frantically, cold sweat starting to bead on his forehead. "It's just, there have been some burglaries in the area recently, so we have to be vigilant. I was just following procedure." He tried to concoct a clumsy excuse. Colonel Mitchell didn't let him off that easily. He knew full well the real reason behind Vance's actions. "Does your procedure include racial profiling and pointing guns at innocent citizens without cause?" "I don't think so, officer." The colonel's direct questioning and uncompromising attitude terrified Vance even more. He knew he couldn't lie or equivocate any longer. But what would happen next? Would the colonel let it go? Or would he report the incident? Colonel Mitchell looked straight into the trembling officer's eyes. He thought for a moment. He could let it pass, chalk it up as an unfortunate incident. But doing so would condone this misconduct, and others, people without his standing, could become this officer's next victims. No, he had to do the right thing. "Officer Vance," he said, his voice full of authority, "I order you to call your immediate supervisor, or better yet, call the chief of the Preston Hills Police Department directly. Report this entire incident as it occurred, immediately." This demand left Vance stunned. Call the chief? Report this? That was practically career suicide. "But, Colonel, sir," Vance started to plead. "No buts, officer," Colonel Mitchell cut him off. "That's an order. Either you make the call or I will." He paused, then added a sentence that sent Vance's world spinning. "And perhaps I should also place a call to the office of the U.S. Attorney General. Eleanor Hayes is a very close friend of my family. I'm sure she would be very interested in how the Preston Hills Police Department treats military officers, especially officers of color." The Attorney General? Eleanor Hayes? Close friend? Each word struck Vance like a hammer blow. He felt dizzy, his legs threatening to buckle. He knew the name Eleanor Hayes. Who in Preston Hills didn't? A powerful woman? A tough politician? The head of the U.S. Department of Justice? And this colonel was her close friend? Absolute terror seized Vance. He couldn't think straight anymore. He trembling pulled his radio from his belt, stammering into it, requesting an urgent connection to the chief of police. His future was now completely bleak. Officer Vance's radio call to the dispatch center was choked with stammering and trembling. He tried to downplay the situation as much as possible, mentioning a misunderstanding with a citizen on Oakmont Drive and requesting to speak directly with Chief Robert Miller. But the panic in his voice couldn't hide the unusual nature of the situation. While waiting for a response, Vance stood like a man adrift, unable to look Colonel Mitchell directly in the eye. He kept wiping the cold sweat pouring down his forehead and neck. The pistol at his hip felt like lead, a constant reminder of his idiotic actions. He knew he had gone too far, crossed an irrevocable line. The price for his prejudice and sudden burst of anger would likely be steep. Colonel Mitchell stood impassively, observing the officer crumbling before him with unnerving calm. He said nothing more, simply stood there, arms crossed, the steady posture of a soldier accustomed to waiting and facing pressure. He knew the wheels were already in motion. All that remained was to let procedure and justice take their course. Just a few minutes later, Vance's radio crackled to life. This time it wasn't the dispatcher's voice, but the deep, somewhat strained tones of Chief Robert Miller himself. "Vance, what the hell are you doing on Oakmont Drive? Report immediately! Are you having trouble with Colonel Mitchell?" Chief Miller's voice was urgent and worried. Clearly, the news had reached him quickly, perhaps through another channel, or maybe the name Mitchell combined with the Oakmont Drive address was enough to warrant his immediate attention. Sir, Chief ... Vance stammered into the radio. There's been a slight misunderstanding. Cut the misunderstanding crap," Chief Miller interrupted, his voice turning stern. "Do you have any idea who you just messed with? Do you know who Colonel Mitchell is? Do you know about his connection to Attorney General Hayes?" Hearing this, Vance nearly collapsed. So the chief knew about the connection too. It was even worse than he had imagined. "Listen to my orders, Vance," Chief Miller commanded sharply over the radio. "First, absolutely no further disrespect towards Colonel Mitchell. Second, secure the scene, do not leave. I am en route with a supervisory team immediately. Understood?" Yes, sir, understood," Vance whispered, his voice filled with despair. The call ended. Vance stood frozen, the radio almost slipping from his grasp. He looked at Colonel Mitchell with eyes full of fear and a hint of belated pleading. "Sir, Colonel, I am truly sorry. I was so stupid. Please, have mercy." Colonel Mitchell merely looked at him with cold eyes, not responding to the plea. For him, apologies at this stage were too late and meaningless. What mattered was ensuring this misconduct was properly addressed to prevent recurrence. Not long after, 2 more police cars appeared at the end of Oakmont Drive, approaching the scene at a moderate speed, lights off. Stepping out of the lead car was Chief Robert Miller, a tall white man around 50, his face visibly tense and serious. Following him were 2 other high-ranking officers, likely from internal affairs or supervision. Chief Miller walked directly towards Colonel Mitchell, completely ignoring Officer Vance cowering nearby. He extended his hand to shake Colonel Mitchell's formally. "Colonel Mitchell, I'm Chief Miller. I am profoundly sorry for the regrettable and utterly unacceptable incident that just occurred. On behalf of the Preston Hills Police Department, I offer you my sincerest apologies." His voice was filled with remorse and respect. "Chief Miller," Colonel Mitchell returned the handshake politely, but without excessive warmth. "I trust this matter will be handled fairly and seriously." "Absolutely, Colonel," Chief Miller affirmed. "You have my word." He turned towards Officer Vance nearby, his eyes turning cold and angry. "Officer Vance," Chief Miller's voice was sharp, "immediately surrender your weapon badge and ID card to Lieutenant Henderson here." He indicated one of the senior officers accompanying him. "You are suspended effective immediately, pending investigation. A transport vehicle will arrive shortly to take you to headquarters for a detailed debriefing with internal affairs." Vance, pale as a sheet, silently complied. He removed his pistol, unpinned his badge, and took out his ID card in utter humiliation, witnessed by the colonel he had just insulted and the head of his own department. Lieutenant Henderson accepted the items coldly, without a word. "Colonel Mitchell," Chief Miller turned back, "would you mind taking a few moments to provide an initial statement to Lieutenant Henderson? Or, if you prefer, we can schedule a more convenient time for you." "I'm willing to provide a statement now, Chief," Colonel Mitchell replied. "I want this matter clarified as soon as possible." "Thank you for your cooperation, Colonel." Chief Miller nodded. He knew this investigation would not be simple, and the pressure from various quarters, especially the Attorney General's office, would be immense. But he also knew this was an opportunity to demonstrate his integrity and commitment to cleaning up his force. The wrongdoing of one individual must not be allowed to tarnish the reputation of the entire department. While Lieutenant Henderson began taking Colonel Mitchell's initial statement right there on the Oakmont Drive sidewalk, Chief Miller signaled the remaining officers to canvass the area, look for additional witnesses, like Mrs. Henderson across the street who had been watching from her window, and ensure everything was thoroughly documented. Vance's patrol car was also secured to check data from the dash cam and body cam. The wheels of the investigation were officially turning, and Officer Ryan Vance's future was now shrouded in darkness. The internal investigation conducted by the Preston Hills Police Department's Internal Affairs Division, IAD, under the close supervision of Chief Miller and with special interest from higher authorities, understood to mean monitoring from the Department of Justice due to Colonel Mitchell's connection to Attorney General Hayes, proceeded urgently, thoroughly, and without any sign of leniency. Lieutenant Isabella Rossi, a tough and impartial female IAD investigator, was assigned lead responsibility for the case. She conducted a series of systematic and comprehensive investigative steps. Colonel James Mitchell's official statement was central to the investigation. During a formal interview at the IAD office, conducted with utmost decorum and respect, Colonel Mitchell provided an extremely detailed, coherent, and objective account of the entire incident. He described everything from starting his morning exercise, being approached without cause by Officer Vance, the derogatory and racially charged remarks, the unreasonable demands, to the dangerous escalation of drawing and pointing a weapon at him. He also clearly recounted how he remained calm, attempted to explain, presented his military ID, and finally demanded Vance contact his superiors. His testimony, delivered with the professionalism and precision of a senior officer, carried undeniable weight and credibility. The statement from Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor who witnessed the event from her window, was also carefully documented. Although she couldn't hear the entire conversation, she confirmed seeing the police officer approach Colonel Mitchell aggressively, hearing loud shouting, and most horrifyingly, seeing the officer draw his gun and point it at her newly arrived neighbor. Her testimony further corroborated Colonel Mitchell's account. The most critical, irrefutable evidence was the data from Officer Vance's body cam. Despite some unclear audio segments, the department's technical experts managed to recover and analyze key video portions. These clearly captured Vance's aggressive tone, prejudiced questions, anger when challenged about the reason for the stop, and culminating in the act of drawing his weapon and the subsequent threats. While the video might not have recorded every subtle racist remark, it was sufficient to expose Vance's abuse of power and dangerous behavior. Dashcam data from the patrol car was also analyzed to determine timelines, location, and Vance's prior activities. Ryan Vance's personnel file was also meticulously reviewed. It revealed several past citizen complaints regarding rude behavior, unprofessional conduct, and potential signs of discrimination. However, these previous incidents were typically resolved internally with verbal reprimands or counseling, never escalating to suspension or termination. This highlighted a previous lapse in departmental oversight and disciplinary consistency, reinforcing Chief Miller's determination to handle this case severely as an example. Facing the IAD investigators, confronted with overwhelming evidence and knowing no one could cover for him, Ryan Vance finally admitted to most of his misconduct. He confessed to approaching Colonel Mitchell based on personal prejudice, using inappropriate and disrespectful language, demanding ID without cause, and drawing his weapon out of anger and feeling challenged. However, he still tried to excuse his actions, claiming he had only gone a bit too far, felt threatened by Colonel Mitchell's defiant attitude, an entirely baseless defense given the victim was unarmed and non-aggressive. He denied having racist motives, attributing his words to anger. After compiling all evidence and testimony, Lieutenant Rossi and the IAD team finalized their report. The conclusion was unequivocal. Officer Ryan Vance had committed serious and systemic violations of numerous articles within the Preston Hills Police Department's Code of Conduct, ethics rules, and operational procedures. The primary violations included abuse of authority, unjustified approach, detention, and demand for identification of a citizen. Unprofessional and unethical conduct, use of derogatory, insulting, and discriminatory language. Excessive and unnecessary use of force, drawing and pointing a firearm at an unarmed, non-threatening citizen. Violation of anti-discrimination policies. The IAD report recommended the highest disciplinary action, permanent termination of Ryan Vance from the police force. But the story didn't end with internal disciplinary action. Due to the seriousness of the incident, particularly pointing a firearm at a citizen, constituting aggravated assault with a deadly weapon under state law, and clear evidence of civil rights violations based on race, prosecutable under federal law, the case file was forwarded to both the County District Attorney's Office and the U.S. Attorney's Office for consideration of criminal charges. Given the special interest from the Department of Justice, linked to Attorney General Hayes, the decision to prosecute Ryan Vance criminally came swiftly. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen, a sharp young lawyer with experience in civil rights cases, was assigned to lead the federal prosecution. Formal charges against Ryan Vance included 1. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, under state law, for intentionally pointing a loaded firearm at Colonel Mitchell, causing reasonable fear of serious bodily injury or death. 2. Official misconduct, under state law, for abusing his position and authority to commit illegal acts and violate professional ethics. 3. Deprivation of rights, under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Under federal law, for willfully depriving Colonel Mitchell of his federally protected rights, right to safety, right against unreasonable seizure, based on his race and under the guise of law enforcement. This decision to pursue criminal charges sent a powerful message that police misconduct involving abuse of power and racial bias would face not only internal discipline, but also the severe penalties of the law. Ryan Vance now faced not only the loss of his career, but the real possibility of prison time. The trial of former police officer Ryan Vance took place several months later in the U.S. District Court, drawing significant media and public attention. The case transcended the misconduct of a single officer, touching upon deep-seated issues of racial profiling within law enforcement, abuse of power, and the relationship between the military and local police. The image of a decorated black Marine colonel becoming a victim of discrimination and gun threat on an American street evoked widespread outrage and empathy. Ryan Vance appeared in court a changed man. Gone was the arrogance and aggression, replaced by anxiety, fear, and remorse, though whether genuine or driven by fear of punishment remained uncertain. He sat silently beside his defense attorney, his face gaunt, eyes often downcast. The prosecution's star witness, Colonel James Iron Mike Mitchell, appeared in court in his formal Marine Corps blue dress uniform, adorned with numerous medals signifying years of service and combat valor. His presence, dignified, authoritative, and calm, commanded respect and lent immense credibility in the courtroom. On the witness stand, Colonel Mitchell recounted the events once more, his voice clear, concise, and objective. He showed no hatred or desire for revenge against Vance, simply stating the facts of what happened that fateful morning. He detailed Vance's demeanor, words, and actions, from the initial approach to the drawing of the weapon. He also explained his calm reaction stemmed from military experience and situational assessment, not defiance or resistance, as the defense tried to imply. His precise, consistent testimony, coupled with his impeccable personal reputation, carried enormous weight. Alongside Colonel Mitchell's testimony, AUSA Sarah Chen presented a barrage of irrefutable evidence. The body cam footage was replayed, exposing the raw abuse of power and discriminatory attitude. Mrs. Henderson's testimony confirmed what she witnessed. The IAD investigation findings and expert analyses on use of force protocols and police conduct standards were systematically presented. Chen argued forcefully that Vance's actions were not an isolated mistake or misunderstanding, but the direct result of ingrained racial bias and a conscious abuse of power. She emphasized that such conduct not only violated the law, but severely eroded community trust in law enforcement. Ryan Vance's defense attorney struggled to counter the prosecution's evidence and arguments. They attempted to mitigate the charges, suggesting Vance acted under job stress, sleep deprivation, or misjudged the situation due to recent burglaries. They portrayed Vance as a young officer who made a mistake in the heat of the moment, was now deeply remorseful, had lost everything, and pleaded for a chance at rehabilitation. They also argued that Colonel Mitchell's initial failure to comply with the order to get down contributed to the escalation, an argument widely seen as victim blaming. After days of intense testimony, evidence presentation, and closing arguments, the federal jury of 12 deliberated. They didn't take excessively long, indicating strong consensus and the compelling nature of the prosecution's case. When the jury returned, the courtroom tension was thick. Ryan Vance sat pale, hands clenched. The jury foreperson stood, their voice clear and solemn in the absolute silence. On the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, we the jury find the defendant, Ryan Vance, guilty. On the charge of official misconduct, we the jury find the defendant, Ryan Vance, guilty. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, we the jury find the defendant, Ryan Vance, guilty. The final verdict was delivered: guilty on all major counts. Ryan Vance slumped in his chair, burying his face in his hands. Sobs erupted from his family members in the gallery. Colonel Mitchell, seated in the front row for witnesses, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his face impassive, but knowing internally that justice was being served. Weeks later, the sentencing hearing convened. Presiding Judge Samuel Peterson, an elderly, respected black judge with extensive experience in civil rights cases, sat on the bench. He looked down at former officer Ryan Vance standing before him, awaiting the final judgment on his life. Judge Peterson began reading his sentencing remarks, his voice deep but imbued with gravity and sternness. He recounted the case details, emphasizing the irrefutable evidence of Vance's misconduct. "Ryan Vance," Judge Peterson said, "you were entrusted with a sacred duty, immense power accompanied by the community's trust. But you betrayed that trust flagrantly. You allowed personal racial prejudice to dictate your actions, leading to the harassment, insult, and ultimately the life-threatening endangerment of an innocent citizen with a deadly weapon." He looked directly at Vance. "Your victim was not just an ordinary citizen. He is Colonel James Mitchell, a senior officer in the United States Marine Corps, a man who has dedicated his life to serving and protecting this country, defending the very freedoms you so callously trampled upon. Your actions were not only an affront to Colonel Mitchell, but an affront to the badge, to the military, and to the core values of equality and justice upon which this nation was founded." The court acknowledges the defendant's belated remorse and lack of prior serious convictions. However, these factors cannot diminish the severity of the offenses, particularly the use of a weapon and the clear racial motivation. The law must be upheld. Justice must be served. This sentence must be sufficient to deter others who might contemplate abusing their power and sowing division based on race. Therefore, after careful consideration of all facts, aggravating and mitigating factors, the court sentences the defendant, Ryan Vance, to— Judge Peterson paused briefly, then declared firmly, 3 years and 6 months imprisonment in federal prison. The sentence of 3.5 years was read. Ryan Vance stood stunned, unable to believe his ears. He had hoped for a lighter sentence, perhaps probation. But now he faced long years behind bars. The sobbing from his family grew louder. His permanent termination from the police force had already occurred. Now, the criminal conviction and prison sentence marked the final end of Ryan Vance's future. U.S. Marshals approached, handcuffed him once more, this time as a convicted felon, and led him out of the courtroom to begin serving his time. Justice, though sometimes slow and complex, had ultimately been served rigorously. Abuse of power and racial discrimination had exacted a heavy price. The 3.5-year prison sentence for former officer Ryan Vance resonated widely, not just in Preston Hills but across the country. It was viewed as a landmark ruling, demonstrating the justice system's intolerance for police misconduct, especially when involving racial bias and excessive force. Within the Preston Hills Police Department, Vance's case became a hard-learned lesson. Chief Robert Miller, despite facing pressure and criticism for prior management shortcomings, used the opportunity to push forward significant reforms decisively. Mandatory training courses on implicit bias, cultural sensitivity, communication skills, and de-escalation techniques were implemented more broadly and frequently. Procedures for officer monitoring, particularly body cam usage, were tightened. The citizen complaint process was improved for transparency and effectiveness. He also publicly committed to fostering a work environment where any act of discrimination or abuse of power would be condemned and dealt with severely, without exception. Colonel James Mitchell, having fulfilled his role in the legal process, quietly returned to his work and daily life. He sought no media attention, nor positioned himself as a symbol in the fight against racism. For him, bringing the incident to light and ensuring justice was served was his duty as a citizen and a soldier. He believed his actions, coupled with the court's verdict, were sufficient to send the necessary message. He continued his military career, commanding his unit with even greater respect and admiration from subordinates and peers. Occasionally, he still jogged along Oakmont Drive in the early mornings, but now, perhaps, his neighbors saw him with different eyes, not just curiosity, but respect and gratitude. Thank you for listening to this entire story. If you enjoyed this content, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful story. We'll have another meaningful story for you tomorrow.